First of all, thank you all for coming tonight. Again, a very exciting culmination of 2.5 days of a lot of hard and very exciting work. For those of you who haven't been here for the last couple days, it's really been something. And we've had incredible turnout. Yesterday, the first day, we had, I think, about 75 people that came during the middle of a work day to come participate, and that's really a testament to all of you and to the community of Watertown that everyone's willing to come out, spend their time, put their energy into working on this whole project and a future plan, a future vision for Watertown Square. Again, as I mentioned a couple nights ago, very exciting that we have a lot of our city council here. I think another example of how important this project is and also how likely we are to be able to make some of these things happen. The leadership of the city of Watertown's here and participating in this effort, and I think that really says a lot about how we're going to be able to move forward. The next thing I wanted to do was just say thank you to a couple notable people. First, Berkeley Investments, again, for letting us use this building. It is, as I've said before, I think it is the perfect venue for this event. It is right here in the heart of the square, and this unfinished space, I think, really gives us that mental image of a clean slate and an opportunity to really imagine things and really think about opportunities for the future. Secondly, I want to thank our vendors that came tonight. Again, restaurants and entities that are here in our community and providing us something to eat tonight, an opportunity for some of you to experience some of their food. We have the Meat Spot, we had Chulo Restaurant, Demos and Osum's, and the Armenian Museum donated the water. And we want to thank all of them for that contribution. And I would say that we have such a good turnout because we had food, but that wouldn't explain the last 2 days. And I think it's great to have all of you here and participating. As I said, it's been a very exciting 2.5 days. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the engagement and how incredible it's been, how many people we've had come and participate in this event. We're going to talk a little bit about the work group sessions that we've had, and for those of you who haven't been here, give you a sense of what we've been doing and some of the takeaways. And then we're going to start going into some of the outcomes, some of the solutions that our very talented consultant team have come up with. So, Charrette engagement, overall attendance. Oh, what happened to overall attendance? Well, we've had incredible attendance. I think, oh, here we go. Some incredible numbers. 230 different individuals have participated in the events. For, again, weekday events, mostly during the day, to have that kind of a turnout is just amazing. 467 total signups. 141 here Tuesday night, and 207 in terms of Wednesday sessions where we had some topic discussions, and 86 people attending Thursday sessions. Again, just incredible turnout. Going back to the Charrette and what we've been doing, Tuesday night we talked about the existing conditions, a tremendous amount of very detailed information about Watertown Square. I think all factors into what we've been doing. Then we had some breakout sessions where we talked about individual topics. The intersection, which obviously is very important to the fabric of Watertown Square and very important in terms of what we can envision as solutions. Talked about urban form, the nature of the buildings that are in the square, how they relate to each other. The strategic sites, some of those are particularly important properties in the square and opportunities for redevelopment. We talked a little bit last night about sort of interim progress, where we were, and showed some examples of solutions. Kind of narrowed it down to 3. And then today we've talked about Destination Square. What are some of the things we can do to help create a destination, Watertown Square, a place for people to come to, a place for people to experience things and want to stay and be a part of that community. And then MBTA zoning, you know, that's an important thing that we need to implement and find ways to comply with, and so we talked about some of the options surrounding that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk a little bit about some of the work sessions.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's been a really incredible past few days. You all really brought a lot of energy to these working sessions. For those who weren't there, we had a very large turnout, as Steve mentioned. So in each session, what we ended up doing was breaking out into 4 different tables so that we could tackle the different topics together and really hear feedback directly from you. So I think what we've tried to do is just pick one board from each session just to give a little bit of an idea of what we were talking about in each one. And I think you can tell from the number of stickies on this board, there were a lot of ideas. And we certainly did our best to try and capture everything that was discussed. In this working group, we were really talking about how we can improve the built environment relating to what it means to have an activated public realm, as well as thinking through what are standards that we can have for our buildings so that architecturally they're doing what we want them to do and so that we're comfortable with the built form that we're seeing. And so there were a lot of ideas on this one. I think some salient ones that I'll mention are there was a lot of people that wanted to see more open space along the river, more opportunities to create that visual connection, have outdoor seating, restaurants, breweries, et cetera, that really engage the riverfront. There were also ideas for how to shape buildings, in particular how to differentiate the ground floor retail from, say, upper story residential uses in a mixed-use building. So those are just a couple examples, but there were really a lot of great ideas that were thrown out. We also had a session on Destination Square. This was really thinking through ideas for improving and supporting the small business environment that we have and ways that we can improve the public realm adjacent to businesses so that they work well together with one another. Some ideas that came up were having some sort of integrated branding to better connect Watertown Square and create an identity for it. Thinking through ways to have pop-up businesses and incubators to support those new businesses. There are also ideas about creating more integrated pedestrian paths and wider sidewalks with landscape strips and planting alongside those businesses. So there were a lot of really great policy and urban public realm related examples here. We also had a really interesting session this morning about the MBTA community zoning. There were a lot of different ideas and viewpoints that emerged, so it was hard to say, or hard to just focus on one poster or one idea that emerged, so we decided might as well show 2. The map on the left, there was a lot of comfort with being able to zone more of the study area, being able to show maybe more height, more density within Watertown Square. On the map on the right, there was a little hesitation toward having too much by right zoning in the square, so there was more areas that were zoned for medium or lower density. But we just wanted to highlight there are several different viewpoints that we're hearing, and we're certainly going to take our time to digest them as we continue to develop schemes. There's also a working group that we did that tackled strategic sites, so thinking through what are areas that we consider soft sites that are potential, or what we say ripe for redevelopment down the road. There are a lot of different characteristics that we thought maybe make certain sites more ripe for redevelopment than others, and this particular working group came up with a pretty cool matrix that tried to identify what qualities certain sites had that made them more likely for redevelopment. So I'm going to hand this now to George, who's going to walk through a few of those in particular.
I'm not doing a very good job at walking these days at all, but so I broke my foot, and this is not a typical role of a city manager to do this particular talk, but I pulling back to my planning days here and my 20 years experience of being a city planner, I found it really interesting to look at the urban forum, the MBTA communities, the destination square, and particularly the strategic sites boards that came out of the 4 groups that met. And the groups were mixed up, so as different circumstances occurred, there were different groups came to different conclusions. Spent quite a bit of time looking at it, looking particularly at the strategic site section to kind of see if we could find some areas where there was common ground. Now, when you look at Watertown Square, and we've heard a lot of people who want things to stay the same and want things to change, there's a number of circumstances where they identify things they really like about the square and really want to make sure it's successful over the long run. For example, people really love our historic Watertown Savings Bank buildings, and so there are certainly areas where you can identify locations to say, okay, I want to make sure that is something that stays here for the long run. But I started to focus on six strategic sites, kept on kind of reappearing on form after form, on board after board to say, hey, there's something here we could do that could be better than what we have. So I want to start with the welcome to Watertown moment that occurs when you enter Galen Street from Newton. And as opposed to, my most often when I'm coming into Watertown from Watertown, I'm coming from Belmont on Common Street, and you have kind of this classic residential look, or if you're coming in on Arsenal and you see the historic old and new of the Arsenal corridor. Here on Galen Street, we have a tough time defining exactly what we have here. So I think there is an opportunity here to look at what the future of this could be as we talk about zoning and land use. There are some residential blocks that are wonderful, and then there are some commercial blocks that don't meet the walkable standard that we named this session after. The second side I want to talk about is the MBTA bus yard. So the T has had conversations about the idea that they don't need to own this much pavement in this parcel of land right on the edge of our Charles River. And they have engaged in a number of conversations in recent past, about selling portions of this site and consolidating. I think that the feedback we got from the community, there were some interesting things. One of the first one was that folks felt like this is not the next biotech lab site, but that if there was new development here, that it should focus really on housing. The MBTA does need to find a place to store up to 11 buses in the middle of, in the middle of the day, especially to get their new better bus project going, where they can provide guaranteed more frequent service. And we definitely want guaranteed more frequent service, so we want to make sure that happens. But you could put within this site the opportunity to do that, and also some housing. There was talks about a restaurant, a market, something that really engaged in the water's edge, maybe something that stepped back on the water side, so people had, if you go higher in housing, if you go to fourth floor, steps a little back from the third, you get a little deck overlooking the water, things like that. So definitely not necessarily consensus on how tall a building would be here. I've had people say build towers, I've had people say build 4 stories, I've had people say build townhouses, but more to come on that. But there was definitely discussion that this staying the way it is was not a great site. The third site is what I will refer to as the old Santander Bank. And I took the picture from the backside on purpose. The Main Street facade is what it is, but the back is this parking lot with a big sign that says don't park here, and a lot of pavement where not many people are parking. There were some ideas that came out of the plan. There was everything like put a grocery here, put housing here, put incubator space for small industrial startups here, put a food kitchen here for small restaurants to start up. People said 3.5 stories, 4.5 stories, 5.5 stories, but generally folks thought that there was opportunity here right in the core of the square. When Jeff presents his designs, you'll see that there's ways that you could link this in to kind of what happens with the future on the parking lots. The police station wasn't as popular of a topic of conversation, but I wanted to make sure it was mentioned on a few boards. I want to make sure to mention it because there's something very important about this site that makes it different than the last 3 that I showed you, and that is that we here in the city of Watertown own this site, which means we are in control of where things go from here. I've heard suggestions here that we tear it down and put more surface parking. not really meet the Watertown walkable things we've been talking about. I've heard suggestions that this could be a place for expansion of our library. I've heard opportunities to build elderly affordable housing. I would like, as we go through the next months of this, to spend some time refining the discussion about what the future of this particular site could be. I will tell you, this building, despite some historic character, once you get inside of it, you'll see it as a very, very difficult structure to retain. It has accessibility issues, it has water issues. It was built as a police station. It has jail cells in it. It doesn't lend itself well to adaptive reuse as some buildings do. But as I said, we own it. We own its destiny. So having a city building in the mix is pretty good. The fourth site I will call the Arsenal Street block. In particular, I'm looking at this piece on the north side of Arsenal that runs along where Tire is. One of the things that's interesting about this is we intend to extend the two-way cycle track that's on Arsenal Street past these properties to where it's going to link in on that little Taylor Street piece that we built and then go across Mount Auburn Street to Baptist Walk. And the reason why I think that's interesting is because if you extend a two-way cycle track across all these driveways, it isn't the most wonderful place to cycle unless something changes. So, with all respect for all of the businesses that are here, I do think there was a lot of interesting conversation about the possibility of this as an MBTA zone site and where that might go. Now, I do want to shout out one business. There were a couple people who said, don't lose Wild Willie's. We all love Wild Willie's, so it's always tough when dealing with like a beloved tenant when you're dealing with a block that people otherwise define as something that could potentially change. It's something we struggle with all the time. If there's a way to work with them and find them a way to still be part of the square when things like that happen, it's always a worthwhile discussion. So one of the things that I find very interesting about this block is that you go just down into the Arsenal corridor where like Elon Union Market is, and you've got 4-story buildings, kind of more density of apartments. We want to get people out of their cars. We want to get people walking. We want to get people close to amenities. We've got this square that we're building up and doing all this great stuff with. This is the link that's between them. So making that link more walkable is an important part of getting to walkability. And then the last one I want to talk about is what I call east side of Mount Auburn Street, and I'll admit this one's a little challenge for me right now, and I think for a number of people identified it as a challenge and struggled with it a little bit. So here on the corner we have this building. This is not old. It's about 20 to 25 years old. It was built with a design that puts all the entrances off the parking lot on the back, and so the street wall on the street is all like no interaction directly with it. Most of the tenants that have been in this building seem to struggle. Like it seems to not really find its momentum. And what it is it's as a visible piece that you kind of see as you approach the intersection. It kind of gets lost in the intersection. It's short, it's not connected to the intersection at all. So there was a lot of feedback from folks that talked about the idea that something could change here. Now behind it you have a 1-story building that Verizon's using, and behind that you have the vacant lot at 33 Mount Auburn. And this is where I think there's some of the challenges of it. Some of the boards suggested that as one site, the 3 separately owned lots as one site. Some of them kind of looked at parts of it or looked at them together. I think one of the big challenges when we look at how we approach these things is whether or not we want to consolidate sites or whether or not we want to build small. There are challenges with building small. If people want to park, you end up with garage doors everywhere. You end up with challenges of scale. But there are challenges with going big, because once you consolidate things, buildings are bigger and you have to do more work to try to make them feel more human in their interaction and their design. So I think that as we look at that, the discussion about consolidating or not consolidating becomes a key part of the questions when we look at these sites. As an example, one of the sites that's not on my list is 104 Main Street, which was recently approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals. That's going to add over 100 units of housing. That's going to put maintain first floor retail on Main Street. The Zoning Board pushed a lot of changes there to create a little more green space on that plan, but that plan is approved That plan is a lot consolidation, similar to what you might consolidate here or you might not. And so as we think about the future and how we want to or not want to do those sort of things, I think that question kind of comes out of the boards when you look at the fact that some consolidate and some don't there. So anyway, that's my my 6-site story, and I will turn it back over to the consulting team. And thanks for listening.
All right, so I'm going to do my best to try and summarize 16 different boards from the past 2 days. It was a lot of content, so we're going to call these emerging themes rather than major defining ones, because we're still trying to wrap our heads around some things. So for urban form, it was very clear that people want to see more outdoor opportunities for fun. Fun was a word that I heard a lot of over the past couple days, that people want to see more spaces for events, even just spaces for outdoor dining and people watching. People also want to be able to see differentiation within architecture of building forms. So I heard a lot that people don't want to see more boxy buildings. And some things that we heard were maybe height or taller buildings would be okay if there were design standards that would better break up the building form, make it feel a little bit more differentiated and more kind of human scale. Some things that we heard from strategic sites were generally enthusiasm for more mixed-use development, and certainly a lot of the sites that we heard about were the auto-related businesses along Arsenal Street. Another thing that we heard was with regards to the MBTA site that George was just talking about. People were really excited about the idea of more housing, certainly denser housing, and having community-oriented amenities, alongside a consolidated transit hub so you're not running across the bridge to make your bus connections. The other thing we heard about was about having more pedestrian pass-throughs for larger buildings so that you're creating a more walkable and friendly urban environment. Some things that we heard from Destination Square are that people want to see more event space for the community. They also want to see, just in general, more activated outdoor spaces and wider sidewalks with planting zones. There's also some talk that we heard about more opportunities for integrating art in outdoor spaces. We heard some things about murals and trying to tie that to related businesses. This was something I mentioned earlier, but we also heard ideas about ways to integrate branding that promote Watertown Square. This could be something that's done via signage and interactive displays. Also, we heard some things as well about tying local history of the square and making that a part of the identity. We heard many, many things about MBTA community zoning, but I'll just highlight a few things here. Some people were in favor of having an affordable housing bonus that would provide extra height as an incentive. We heard some things that taller buildings are okay, provided that they have upper story step back, so making sure that you don't perceive that upper story to be quite so tall from the street. We also heard some enthusiasm for extending proposed zoning south to be alongside Galen Street. And another thing that we heard was that for buildings that abut lower residential neighborhoods, that generally we should provide for greater setbacks and zone for lower building heights. So again, this is just a few of many, many, many things that we heard over the past few days, but we wanted to tease out just what we think of as emerging themes, and we're really excited to dive into this content further. So I'm going to pass it off to Tim to start walking through the intersection scenarios. To Jeff.
I'm Jeff, not Tim. So our first meeting Wednesday morning, we had a small room and like 70 people showed up. And we marched through these intersection scenarios. I don't know if I need to march through all of them again before jumping to the ones that we've kind of narrowed it down to, except to say that there were a variety of different ideas that we kind of turned away from. One of them was roundabouts. I'm not a huge fan of roundabouts in urban Main Street shopping locations because they just don't feel very static. They feel very dynamic. They feel like a space of motion. Even if you design them to be very safe, they generally don't feel all that urban and walkable. Moreover, we met with some members of the sight impaired community here, and you know, blind people do not like roundabouts. They're still used all over the place, but most communities have a very small population of blind people, but here you have a significant population of blind people. And I think that's an important factor that really hit home with us as we did a site tour with two folks who you know, were using us to guide them and canes to guide themselves. And we learned a lot. I'd actually never done that. In 30 years, I'd never walked around a community with someone who was visually impaired and have them, you know, and see it through their eyes, so to speak, right? But they made it very clear to me that they would not be comfortable with a solution with roundabouts. And I think in a community where you have the Perkins School, that led us in a different direction. But we narrowed these down, and I think rather than going through every possible solution, we'll talk to you about the three that we narrowed it down to, which we showed last night. Who was here last night? Okay, about half of you. So these are familiar to about half of you, but I think for the others, we should walk through them. And we're calling these schemes the Four Corners scheme, the Delta bout, like a roundabout, but it's signalized, and it just happens to have counterclockwise motion in it. So it's an about, so we called it the Delta bout. And then finally what we're calling the mini Main Street solution. And there were votes afterwards, and both the Four Corners and the mini Main Street solution were quite popular. And the Delta bout, you know, I'm always very careful, or I try to be careful not to sway the jury. And I think when Tim and I talked about the Delta bout, we really didn't diss it. We didn't put it down. And actually, I had some enthusiasm for the Delta bout because it's a lot like Brattle Square. It's a lot like Harvard Square, Brattle Street, Mount Auburn Street, Mass Ave. And no one liked it. So we're not going to talk much about it, but I believe, do we show it closer up, Lauren? We don't. So just to describe it to you, it's hard to see if you're in the back, but basically it was two-lane one-ways all around the Delta, which really does clean up the traffic flow in a wonderful way. Now, each intersection would be signalized, so you wouldn't have the challenge as a pedestrian, particularly a blind pedestrian, of crossing it, but it was still multiple lanes in each direction, which, if you know Harvard Square, can be a very walkable environment. And I want to take a little pause here to say, I think Harvard Square is and you guys are sick about hearing about Harvard, but I think it's a really good model for us because it has a ton of traffic, but they haven't let that traffic widen their street system very much, right? So it's often congested, it's hard to get through, but you get through it, but it's still safe, it's pretty safe to walk through, and it feels that way because over the years, unlike you guys, they didn't let the pressure from traffic widen their streets in any significant way. But the solution, which had one-way travel all around the Delta, none of these streets are more than 2 lanes, but they don't, you know, they're not that easy to cross, right? They're full streets. And so the feeling was that it would isolate the Delta too much. And it's not used as it is. So we end up with a much bigger, you know, what you see in the middle of the Delta there is the current size of the Delta. And you'll see all these schemes dramatically increase the amount of usable public space. But the Delta bout made this giant isolated triangle. And my comment was, you know, this could be great if you're determined to program it. If you're determined to put playgrounds and other activities and a Six Flags and who knows what else in the middle of the Delta bout, including buildings. It would be really neat to have buildings in it. But I think there wasn't much confidence in that happening. So we moved to the other 2 schemes. One is called Four Corners, because it simplifies the intersection to a normal crossing. And it does that by peeling Charles River Road off of it. And the only kind of, the trade-off here is that it probably doesn't work, and I welcome Stantec to interrupt me with corrections, but it probably doesn't work for these guys to take a left. Jason, would you agree? And so this becomes less of a part of your street network, right? The idea of taking Charles River Road instead of Arsenal Street to get to or from the square becomes questionable, because this left-hand turn is probably too close to this intersection. Now, we might be able to resolve that. So let's not write that off yet. And we might be able to resolve it with signalization or perhaps with some other street configuration. So let's not give up on that yet. But once you accept this change, you see how simple the intersection has become. Another thing that we've done is we've taken the busway, we've narrowed it tremendously down just to one lane. So the effective feeling is that the Delta is connected now to this building, right? The lovely building on the busway now. But this one lane is the 450 trips at peak hour that are people coming from the west and wanting to go to Newton and to the Pike. So that takes a lot of pressure off this intersection, which is why you're seeing an intersection which is only 3 lanes. One lane one way, one lane the other way, and then that left turn lane that keeps you from holding up the person behind you when you want to take a left lane, so left turn. And you can see all the pavement that is created for, that of course would all have trees. And what none of these schemes are showing, for simplicity, they're not showing the parallel parking, they're not showing the bike lanes that will be everywhere and up on the curb, right? They're not showing all the trees that are going into the designs, but they're just showing the number of lanes going in different directions. It's a very simple solution, it's a very clean solution, and the Delta is better connected to this building. However, this is not a retail building, and it would need considerable change, even to the beautiful facade, to be an effective retail building. So that's a little bit of a downside. All two-way streets. We're talking about dedicated bus lanes going across the bridge. And those of you who haven't been part of this part of the conversation, MBTA was with us in the first meeting on the first day, and they feel there's a very high chance that most of the bus routes, except for which one? Except for the 70, which is going east-west, right? Most of the bus routes will be, all the others will be consolidated, the bus stop across the river. So the pressure to have a lot of buses coming through here has gone away. We're not taking questions yet, I'm sorry. There'll be questions at the end. So that's the Four Corners solution. And Tim, do you want to talk about the details?
Yeah, for each of the schemes, Tim Love, we thought it would be useful to drill in to look at pedestrian paths and strategies about connecting the Delta, both with landscape and with architecture, to the edges. And so for the Four Corners scheme, one concept was to take the Charles River path, and because this is only one lane, literally bring it into the Delta and have it get you all the way to the corner. And so, and to take the landscape regime and also bring that all the way to the corner, to bring the city mouse and the country mouse as close to the corner as possible. The other strategy is to include some retail pavilions on the opposite side of Main Street that are very carefully organized. This one terminates the axis of Merchants Row. These two frame a view to the landscape between two pavilions from Spring Street. And really, even though this is a lane in each direction, that's still a good Main Street dimension to really get this section of Main Street to really feel like the kind of center of Watertown Square in terms of pedestrian activity. So again, we're bringing the Charles River right to the Four Corners, and we're creating a very interesting relationship between the two. You'll see also that we've added back a lot of parallel parking along this edge of Main Street, both sides here, both sides of this single lane, kind of slip lane that gets you to Galen Street, because that parallel parking in a way domesticates streets, and you feel more comfortable as a pedestrian if there's parallel parking between you and the street. So, and this, some of these moves were a little bit inspired by Harvard Square, discussing that kind of Brattle Street curve, because there's a lot of landscape possible there, which has a radius of a street now. And then we kind of visualize this as a three-dimensional drawing. The vertical isn't quite to scale. These are the retail pavilion. They were a little bit inspired by Janet's 1981 Boston Architectural College thesis. She showed me this canoe pavilion she designed. Are you here, Janet? Yeah, Janet. And then we started to think about these other comments we heard about breaking down the scale of the buildings. We love that bank facade kind of nosing into the square. And so one of the ideas that might get translated into design guidelines or zoning is, are there other things that can happen at key points around the square, architectural features that break down the scale of the building and maybe are keyed up by sight lines from different directions? And so we've toned those with yellow. Is there a building feature here that terminates this street? Are there features on those buildings that better scale up to address a kind of gateway for Mount Auburn Street? So this is a little bit conjecture. They were drawn by hand, but we were trying to understand how the build form, the landscape, the pedestrian networks. This also works very well for bicycles, because if the cycle track comes all the way here, at the all pedestrian stop, bikes can just get right on the trail and make their way down the greenway. So we're digging this one. We like both. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff to talk about Mini Main Street, and I'll come back for the sketch of this one.
So this is a modification of a scheme that those of you who came the first morning didn't see, because this was introduced by a citizen, but we changed it a little bit. And the idea is, and it's perfectly logical. Oh, I need the, thank you. Remember, I commented in the other scheme that the triangle was basically effectively attached to this side of the square where it's not commercial. And the best way to activate, the delta, the best way to activate the delta is to attach it to this side of the square. So it was suggested that we take the trajectory on Beacon that goes to Main and peel it back around the delta. And I've made the delta a little bit smaller in order to widen these sidewalks and in order to make the peeling back not that far. But you can see it peels it off and then goes right back. And then, like a Parisian Avenue, if you can picture a Parisian Avenue where there's the main center part with all the lanes, and then the side part beyond the trees where the shops are, and the slow speed, very slow speed, one-lane street is where people park. Like a Parisian Avenue, you can peel off, and if you're not in a hurry, and if you want to shop or hang out or park or perhaps go down Spring Street, you peel off onto this little street that's so tiny and so slow. The scheme that was recommended first did not have this street there. My experience makes me think that if you don't have a street here, these shops will actually do worse than they're doing now. I think you need cars moving slowly somewhere near the fronts of the stores for them to be successful. But that's what we're calling the mini Main Street. But you can see that one advantage of this scheme is that it connects straight to Charles River Road. This is mislabeled. That's Riverside Drive. Riverside Street? Riverside. Riverside something. Street. It can keep its own trajectory southbound. Charles River Road isn't really moved, and it connects directly to Mount Auburn Street. Now, this is not a path that many people would take, but it's fine because if you're coming this way on Mount Auburn, it's just an easy right turn to continue. Now, I don't want you to know which scheme is Tim's favorite and which scheme is my favorite, but I want you to understand that there's a misunderstanding of this scheme, which is that if you have to curve left and then curve right and then go straight, that's somehow a bad experience. People don't like sitting in traffic. They don't like waiting at lights, but cars have steering wheels. Buses have steering wheels. And the MBTA, is the MBTA here tonight? Good, I can talk about them. The MBTA operations people, when you talk to them, they hate it when they have to make a turn. I'm like, the bus has a steering wheel. what you should care about is how long it takes you to get through Watertown Square. But the fact is that if traffic is flowing smoothly, you're not going to mind that you have to go a little bit left to go a little bit right in order to make it through. So I don't see that as a disadvantage to this scheme. And then Tim, so you have basically a two-way Main that becomes Beacon. You have a two-way Mount Auburn that becomes Charles River Road. Galen comes in and basically tees into the Beacon two-way. Only the parking is only shown on the mini Main Street, but of course there would be parallel parking in most places. And now I think Tim's going to elaborate on his elaboration of that street.
Yeah, this is the same scheme that Jeff was discussing. It's the colors didn't scan quite as well here, but we also have retail pavilions here. This is landscape. This is the kind of landscape of the Charles River crossing the intersection and making its way back again. And then we spent some time thinking about where the paths would want to be for different kinds of users. So you come from the Charles River, you make your way right to Main Street on this path, which aligns with that edge of Spring Street. You're coming from Spring Street, you want to get to this side of the open space. So those are crosswalks at all three of that T where it runs in here. There's much more open space here than there is today. We haven't relocated some of the memorials and things, so don't bust our chops about that. But and then in a way, the four-corner intersection moves to Charles River Road and Mount Auburn. And the idea is on these very large the kind of plazas that are formed by this, you put a low seat wall and maybe have a tree or two and get some landscaping even in those corners for shade and for people to sit on a seat wall. And then you can see that this plaza would require some landscaping too. This is the three-dimensional drawing. Again, design guidelines or zoning would require kind of features on the end of those buildings to create kind of landmarks that mark some of these intersections. You can see the retail pavilions here, and the way we're bringing the trees into the delta and then back across so that the delta isn't its own kind of landscape, and we can bring that biohabitat and some of those qualities of the Charles River much closer to Main Street.
And I would highlight which Tim mentioned, the retail kiosks. Most successful Main Streets are two-sided, right? You exit a store and you can cross-shop. You see another store. And you have that sense of spatial containment that's very positive when you're on the street. You feel like you're in an outdoor living room when you have buildings on both sides of you. That's one of the problems with the square today. And so we're excited about bringing that into any scheme. And when I first looked at this site years ago, I thought that the Delta was somehow sacred, historical, and there was no way to put anything on it. But in fact, not only does no one really feel that way, but secondly, we're only suggesting putting buildings on the expansion of it, not on the old footprint of it. Did I go the wrong way? Oh yeah, we're going to hand this over to Aaron, our transportation expert.
Thank you, Tim and Jeff. So I just want to remind everyone what the Four Corners was, because we talked about the mini Main for a little bit. And what our task is now is to look at it from a multimodal environment and really dig into how are people walking around here, where are they crossing, how are cars getting through here, how are transit, how are bikes. So I want to first talk about how folks are walking through Watertown Square today. Because the Delta isn't activated and because it's not an inviting place to be, folks aren't walking across it. We heard that multiple times throughout the week. So you see that folks are walking around the Delta, or they're walking on the sidewalks and the few crosswalks. On Tuesday night, we talked about how it takes a while to cross the street. You cross, you wait in the middle, and then you wait for another walk sign. It's an uncomfortable environment. With the Four Corners, because the Delta would be activated with retail, you would have the option to walk through it. And most importantly, I'm going to flip back again. You can see these yellow boxes. Those are the intersection boxes, and you can see it's very large. When we shrink the intersection down, it makes a more comfortable environment. You don't have to walk as long in the street, and then you get back on the sidewalk with the nice landscaping. For cars, we took a look at those vehicle flow diagrams that we showed on Tuesday and in yesterday's meeting, and we looked at what those big movements are. Where are people trying to go? We know that folks are making the Main Street to Mount Auburn and North Beacon. We know that the Mount Auburn to Galen Street flow is an important move, and so we want to make sure that both the Four Corners and the mini Main Street allowed those flows to continue to happen. And the benefit of Four Corners is that by removing Charles River Road from the main intersection, we get a much more efficient, a much simpler signal phasing cycle that allows us to give more green time to all of the movements, and once again, most importantly, more green time for the walkers who are crossing the street. I'm also highlighting, how do I point? Down at the bus hub that is now being used to redirect the southbound Main Street and Pleasant Street vehicles, we're adding a crosswalk there, and they'll be able to also have a simpler exit. For transit, like Jeff said, the MBTA is open to bringing the Route 59 that currently terminates in Watertown Square, as well as the Route 71, down to terminate at the Watertown Yard. And by doing that, we can extend the 71, and that allows us to use that Pleasant Street extension. For the 70, you'll see we don't have any bus stops labeled on here yet. We want to make sure that as we advance this design, we're locating them in a place that makes sense for folks who are making that transfer between the 70 and the other routes at Watertown Yard. So that's to come. For Mini Main Street, once again, we have a much better pedestrian environment. This is what it is today. And we get those smaller intersection boxes and the additional walking paths across the Delta because it's a programmed space with the paths that Tim described. Vehicles are again simplified by us having not the 5-leg intersection of Watertown Square today, but 2 intersections, one that's a 3-leg at Galen, Pleasant Street Extension, and North Beacon, and then the Mount Auburn, North Beacon, Charles River Road. Both of these intersections will operate a lot smoother because we'll be able to prioritize more movements as opposed to having to fit in 5 approaches. And what's really interesting about transit in the mini Main Street, and Jeff made a comment that we were trying to figure out how does the bus get through here. It's really interesting for the Route 70 because by taking it off Main Street and by bringing it closer to the river, we're making a shorter walking connection for Route 70 riders who are transferring to Watertown Yard. So we're not getting you right there, but it's a lot closer, and we'll have more walking opportunities for those folks who are looking to transfer. And I'll mention here that on Galen Street and the rest of Watertown Square, looking at bus priority at signals and on the lanes is something that will continue to evolve as we dive into these designs a little bit further. So south of Watertown Square, we are also looking at Donantum Road and California Street and some of the other roads around Watertown Square as part of our study area. So this is not what is out there today. The pavement markings have changed and Google hasn't updated it quite yet, but it's similar to this. You have a lot of lanes coming into one intersection, and we want to find a way to make this tighter, make this more pedestrian friendly, and make sure it's an extension of the better Watertown Square that we're creating. So this is something you can do today. We can pull the curbs out and narrow the roadways by removing a lane in most directions, as well as adding in that bus priority that you see in red. We can do this because this intersection is designed for a lot more vehicles than are there today. There are also signal changes that we're going to be looking into. And just west of here at California Street, you have this slip lane that encourages vehicles to be driving quickly right next to the river path. So you have folks who are walking, biking, running, pushing a stroller, strolling, and they're next to cars that are encouraged to drive fast. By pulling the curb out and dog-legging this into more of a T intersection, we can slow vehicles down. We know that you do have retail that's west of here. We want to make sure they can still get trucks in. So these designs would be continued to be refined so that we can make sure that those vehicles are able to service. And there's other places in the study area that we're going to look at similar. So I'm going to turn it back to Jeff to talk about the North Beacon and Arsenal solutions.
Thank you, Aaron. So most people pointed us to the wedge. We call it the wedge. I don't know what you call it. But it is where Arsenal Street and North Beacon Street, did I get that wrong again? Which one's to the north? Yeah, Arsenal Street and North Beacon Street split, and they split in the most pavement-friendly way you can possibly imagine. Similar to this design, oops. This was designed by a highway engineer, right? I'm not saying that as a joke. Like, whoever designed this was applying the same techniques that you apply to designing a highway, which is something you don't want in cities. You don't want slip lanes in cities where people are walking, and so we get rid of it. Similarly, this was designed in the most slippery fashion, and whenever you see things that look like pork chops or airplane wings, anything aerodynamic or swoopy, it's a vocabulary that encourages drivers to speed up. It makes pedestrians uncomfortable, and you all know that this is a very uncomfortable location. This is the gas station at the corner, and the width of the gas station here, while not great, is also wide enough to allow for a dogleg connection. However, there's a couple streets and parking lots to access. I want to mention the street that comes out right here that still wants to have a connection. And so I did a plan for this presuming no molting, presuming that the tire shops weren't going away, presuming that the automotive uses would stay, because I think we should make these changes quickly and not wait for the sort of more walkable, pedestrian-oriented growth that actually these changes will encourage to happen. But the drawing I'm going to show you, messy as it is, doesn't change anything in terms of these guys having a bunch of parking in front, but we're going to move it into the street so they can have a plaza in front. These guys have a because they're an automotive business, have a parking lot adjacent to their front, which would stay. Interestingly, though, both this parking lot and this parking lot have two different curb cuts when they really only need one. And we're not going to cut off anyone's access from public streets, but you don't need to have two driveways to a single parking lot. So that led to this solution. And what you're seeing here is North Beacon coming in, and did I get that right? I drive it every day. I just never look at the street signs. North Beacon coming in, and actually, if you want to go through, you would take a right here, and there would be a signal here. And you'll notice I've actually even put 4 lanes here, because people are going to come in and loop around, people are going to come in and go left, people coming east are going to come in and go straight or loop around, come in and go left. I don't know if all those lanes are needed, but I started very conservative. So you have this basic 40-foot collar here, which is basically the dog-legging of Arsenal Street. No, North Beacon Street. Now, these guys had a parking lot in front, but we don't want the sidewalk to be one big driveway skirt, right? So we put a plaza in front, and now we take advantage of all this extra space we've created to put an even bigger parking lot, but one that feels like a traditional street in front of their business. And then that also allows access to this street entering from the south and access to this parking lot here that I showed you before. I'm not sure if this cut in the curb makes sense or not. It's not necessary, but you can see how convenient it might be to come in there. Similarly, this parking lot loses this access point, just as this one went away here, and is only accessed from here. Now notice all the green space that this creates, and this was actually one of the people who left notes for us said, can we put a green space or a playground or something in this precise location? It totally makes sense to do that. There's one error in my drawing, which is that the Arsenal Street bike path, as you know, is consolidated on the north side of the street. And I accidentally showed it split. So this bike path here would actually be consolidated with the one on the other side of the street. But I haven't shown any changes to any of the other businesses. And notice there's 3 lanes here, so the left turn, so the right turn is easy. And there's 3 lanes here because that's what we're expecting at either of the 4 corners or the other scheme, 3 lanes here. But it can neck down to 2 lanes in the middle, and you'll notice it gives us room not just for the bike paths, but also for parallel parking all along it, which will make it a much calmer street. So we feel this is there are other ways to do this, but we feel that this concept is is something we have a lot of confidence in, that it could work quite quickly. Then I wanted to show you a flaw in your network. And I'm sorry the drawing is so tight, but what it's missing is Main Street is right down here, okay? Main Street is south of the picture. Mount Auburn Street is here, heading north, and there used to be a connection. In fact, it wasn't just a walking and driving connection, it was a train connection, basically coming down Baptist Walk and cutting all the way through to Winter Street. And what you've done is you've supersized your blocks. If you've heard me talk much, you know that I quote Jane Jacobs, who said that small blocks, she has a subchapter called The Need for Small Blocks. And small blocks being so important to walkability and business success, and your intersection density, how small your blocks are, is one of the greatest determinants of walkability in a community. And you've lost it here because of the configuration of the parking lot. So what I'm suggesting as a first step is the reinstitution of that axis, and Baptist Walk could easily, Baptist Walk has a strange condition where it's a half city-owned private alley, which has a few cars parked in it, up against a one-sided head-in parking lot. With a little public-private cooperation, that could become a standard urban double-sided parking street, 2-way, right? And then we cut through the parking lot, just cut through, and continue the trajectory. So now we have another street that's parallel to Main Street that's helping to improve the connectivity in both directions for people walking, for people biking and driving. The other thing I've shown is that currently your bike path is not yet complete, right? So it starts at the park and then stops, and then starts again east of here. The city already has plans to pull it through, but this reconfiguration makes it a very clean solution with the 2-way cycle track consolidated throughout this whole area. So we're excited about that. Here they are side by side. It's a very simple change. I'm most interested in this change because of the way that it then sets a great stage for the redevelopment of your surface parking lots. And I'm going to be showing you some proposals for reconfiguring these lots. The way that cities that are growing and succeeding densify, typically, and if you know Northampton, for example, or a great one I love is Frederick, Maryland, is that the surface lot becomes 1/5 as large by becoming a parking structure. It's not easy for cities to pay for that. However, it's easier for cities to pay for it if it's done in conjunction with the construction of other uses that make use of that parking structure, in typically housing. So I work for a lot of real estate developers. I work for a major fund that builds housing all over the country, and the system we use to densify suburban sites in order to get a lot of people living in our downtowns, and actually it's what we're doing at Riverside. If you know Riverside right now, we're taking a 10-acre parking lot and we're turning most of it into a structure so that we can put 600 units of housing at Riverside at the end of the Green Line. It's a similar technique. You put in a parking structure, and then that is a foundation. Then we hope that most of the residents won't come with cars, but if real estate developers are going to get their projects financed, they have to establish a certain ratio of parking. We hope that it's a bit below 1 car per unit, and we would of course encourage it to be even lower. But we need to create a parking structure if we're going to remove the surface parking, replace the surface parking, but also we want to see more housing. Now, I know this is the issue in which the audience is most divided, and that some of you want to see a lot more housing downtown, some of you don't want to see a lot more housing downtown. And here's, I guess, where I'm become less of a friend to some of you. And you've all been so nice to me. They left us chocolate chip cookies upstairs. They bring us chocolates in the morning. Elidora does. But you need more housing in your downtown. First of all, the MBTA Communities Act is requiring you to put more housing in Watertown. The right place for it is in your downtown. And that's because if you move people into your downtown, they have access to all the amenities of downtown, much less likely to own a car and gum up your streets. They have access to all the transit that hubs downtown, much less likely to own a car and gum up your streets. They have the ability to live the sort of lifestyle which so many people in polls tell you they want to live and they cannot find and cannot afford, which is the smaller unit, the apartment or condo in a walkable downtown place. Moreover, if you really want your downtown to come back to life, you need to have a lot of people in it. Jane Jacobs said, you can't invite people downtown, you have to put them there. And what she meant was that the way that you cause downtowns to thrive is to have enough people living in the downtown that they're there around the clock and they're making use of all the amenities so you can have better restaurants and better stores and all the things that people want when they live in a place. So I think most of us on the team, anyone who wants to disagree, please raise your hand. Because we were trained as city planners, and this is our expertise, we have confidence that more people in your downtown is the right solution for your downtown. And you're required to do it anyway. And I tell you, if you don't want these people coming to downtown, where are you going to put them in Watertown? Because you probably don't want them on your little peaceful residential streets. So with that in mind, I had to say that all before I scared you with this incredible amount of development. That's probably about 200 units of housing. With that in mind, I create a few schemes that use up the parking for buildings, which are the standard 65-foot thick buildings that residential developers like, and structures a parking lot that we hide behind apartments so that nobody sees the parking lot. Now, it so happens this lot is probably not entirely available, and this scheme probably doesn't work. So I came forward with this scheme instead, which is, right, so we're just flipping the parking to another site. And it's a little bit trickier. I don't love this one as much because the parking lot edge is unprotected against Winter Street. What it means is that needs to be beautifully designed. Some real money needs to go into making that a nice edge because it's parking against the street, right? Now, it is a new street that wasn't even there before, so maybe our responsibility is a little less. But you can see that here's a parking structure, residential edge against Church Street, residential edge against Spring Street, a little green at the corner, another green here, and then it allows not only for you to remove your surface parking, but then it helps to float the creation of all that housing so close to your downtown. People who are going to shop and dine and create the street life. You know, I heard mentioned earlier, people want to do more people watching in downtown, you know, in Watertown Square. There's not many people to watch right now. And it'd be nice if you had some more. So that's, you know, that's the hard part, right? I know that there's some disagreement on that, but we do feel that this sort of solution, you know, is what's going to get you to the lively, inhabited, successful square that I think most of you want. Now, I wanted to end with a little bit of a recap of what I presented in our very first talk weeks ago, but I wanted to take it to the 202 level in the context of this idea of buildings up against street edges and how big should they be. And you'll recall, those of us, who was here when I gave my long talk weeks ago? Okay, about half of you. So I talk about if you want people to walk in a community, the walk needs to be useful, safe, comfortable, and interesting. And I went through what each of those things mean. And of course, we spend most of our time on the safe walk because our streets in America are not safe to walk on typically. But the comfortable walk, I talked about spatial definition and how the evolutionary biologists tell us that all animals, humans among them, are simultaneously seeking prospect and refuge. We can't help it, it's how we evolved. If we can't see our prey before they attack us, we're not comfortable. But if we don't feel that our flanks are covered from attack, we don't feel comfortable, which is why we love what we call outdoor living rooms. Streets that have good edges, so they feel like spaces because they're spatially contained. And we've been talking a long time about, what sort of ratio is ideal. And, the European urbanism, of course, typically the streets are 2 to 1. They're twice as high as they are wide. The outdoor living rooms are really outdoor living rooms like this one in Madrid, the Plaza Real. And then if you think about where you go on vacation, if you're not going in for a nature vacation, but you're getting on a plane and you want to experience great urbanism, you're seeing streets like these, right, in Portugal or in France or in the Netherlands. And look at the ratios of height to width, Italy, I was just here, Croatia, more Croatia, but then Montreal. And if you have tourists who come to visit you in Boston, where do you bring them, right? Look at the ratios of height to width. Or this is Staunton, Virginia, just a wonderful main street. So the height to width is really important, but I want to make something clear, which is that it's not the same everywhere. And some of you prefer the density and some of you don't like the density, but we need to understand that cities exist on what's called a transect. And this is a term that my mentor, Andres Duani, introduced to the urbanist lexicon, reintroduced about 20 years ago, and I was with him when he did it, called the rural to urban transect. Understanding that good urban design means creating authentic places, and places feel authentic when they have a character somewhere on that spectrum from most rural to most urban, but they're consistent within that zone. So for those of you who are further back, we have what are called the T zones, the transect zones, T1 through T6, rural preserve, rural reserve, suburban, general, center, and core. And you can map them across any city, and you can map them across Watertown. And it's actually just a ecological concept, which we just took a little bit higher up the food chain and applied to humans, right? So if you go from the ocean edge to the upland, to the woodland, and eventually to the inland lakes, you'll see that the flora and the fauna change as you move through the landscape. And that's appropriate and it's natural. But the same thing happens in an urban environment where you have, this is a very old diagram showing the different jobs, the different human activities that are taking places in these different zones. But I'm going to take you through T3, T4, T5, and T6, suburban, urban general, urban center, and urban core. And what you notice when you look at these 4 images is that almost everything changes. The heights of the buildings, the setbacks of the buildings, the presence of sidewalks, the width of the sidewalks, the trees lining up or being scattered, the curvilinear nature of the streets versus a more rectilinear nature of the streets. Everything changes, and it's important when we design places to be consistent within each zone. You can map New Orleans or Washington or San Francisco across these zones. The zones are more similar to each other than across cities than the cities are similar similar to themselves across the zones. So we did a plan for the Butternut neighborhood of Syracuse, and we mapped it so that we could get houses that had setbacks like the houses next to them. And then when we make a new town, and this is a new town that I managed, I visited 20 years after the Charrette last year in Huntsville, Alabama. It's called Providence, and you can see it has a urban core, and then it has these neighborhood centers, urban centers, general neighborhood areas, and then even has a suburban area in lighter yellow up against the suburban neighbors who didn't want anything more dense next to them. So this is a brand new town. This is what the urban core looks like. This is what the general urban area looks like, and this is what the suburban area looks like. So everything changes in the same way that I described to you. it doesn't have to be a spectrum of gradual change. It can be a shocking transition from T1 to T5, right? From urban core in Manhattan to the rural preserve right next to it. And you can map anything according to the transect. So this is my mentor, Andre Stwani. He collected all our shoes at a Charrette and ordered them from most urban to most rural. And then our friend Diru Tadani did the shoe transect. And you can, there's a reason why we don't like SUVs in the city, because they belong in the country. And then, what's the most rural and the most urban car? What's the most rural and the most urban dog? Most rural being the wolf. And then the guys on the Charrette had a little fun with the transect of Paris. Before I get in trouble, the women did the same thing with Brad Pitt. But I had an experience. We were doing the Charrette plan for downtown Fort Myers in Florida. And we had the lighting meeting, the street light meeting. And 4 different people came in, said, what kind of streetlights do you want to see in Fort Myers? And one person said, I want to see lovely, British gas lamps along the street. And someone else came in and said, I like these halo lights that are up on a stick, and they're sexy and kind of modern. Then someone else came in and said, I want a hat on a stick, right? I want a knobby wooden stick with hats on it. And then someone else said, street lights, I want to be able to see the stars. And I thought we were going to have like this horrible fight. And Andres just points to them and says, T6, T5, T4, T2. Okay? You guys hang out in the right transect zone and you won't have a problem, but we're going to put the right lights in the right place based on where we are in the city. And that's the strategy that we want to apply here. So understand that we're pushing for density in the downtown core and less density outside of the downtown core. But this is the part, I would not call your center urban core. I would call it urban center, right? The urban core is Boston. But the urban center zone is a darn active and dense zone. And this is a plan for the heart of your city, which is Watertown Square. So that's why we're pushing for more, to be authentic, to be urban. That's why we're pushing for more stuff here in the center. Understanding that the great majority of Watertown, of course, are these lovely leafy streets, like the one I grew up on just over the border, that is where most of you live. So that's my conclusion, but now we're going to go on to next steps with our leader. Yeah, I believe that, who's doing that? George? The timeline? Steve. Thank you for listening to me. Hey, can I say, this has been, sorry, Steve. One of you asked me tonight, was I surprised by the turnout? And I said, well, I had no expectations, so I couldn't have been surprised because I didn't know, I hadn't formed an image in my mind. But I have to say, for most communities twice this size, you've come out twice as many people. So this is about 4 times the turnout per capita that we see for these events. And I don't know what magic has led to that, but please keep coming. But please, I would like to applaud you all for being here, so applaud yourselves.
Wow. Obviously a lot of great information, some incredible insight, and, obviously we'll have a lot of work to do. I think one of the really important things about the great turnout that we've had and all the participation we've had, as Lauren mentioned, we've got a lot to digest. A lot more information than you typically get in a participation project like this. So while this is our timeline, and I'll get into that in just a second, we have a lot to digest. We want to make sure we really give careful consideration to all the comments that people have made and all the input that you've provided, and really appreciate everybody working on that. And so what I was just talking about is really, this middle part, the next step, where we're going to be developing elements of a proposed plan. And the consultant teams and staff is going to be very busy in January and February, really putting those things together, coming up with some concepts and putting all the things you heard about tonight into a cohesive plan testing out some things, seeing what works and what doesn't, and coming back to you all for more of a public participation probably in March, where we'll have something for you to look at again and to come together and discuss. As we mentioned before, then we have in the tail end of the project, once we come back out to the public, have that interaction with you, going through a public forum, having some interaction, and then going through a process with both the planning board and the city council to bring this home, bring this to fruition. So that's a process from here. George, I don't know if you wanted to add anything?
I just wanted to take one more moment on behalf of all of us here in Watertown to thank everybody for coming out and participating to this point. This is and always has to be an iterative process. We squeeze a lot of this process into these 2.5 days. And then we'll be back out to see you again to show you some feedback based upon everything that you gave us over these 2.5 days. Steve says it takes a while to do that. It may take us longer than anticipated to do that because we got way more sticky notes on boards than I've ever seen before. But please be patient with us. Enjoy the holiday season. I assure you, all of us will be working on trying to process this information and figure out where to go next. And we'll be back again. And we'll be back again a few times to check in and make sure that our planning documents are reflecting where we can find consensus, where we can find some direction, where we can find some ideas that make sense and that can be supported. I know it is particularly challenging because there are a number of places where we have seen disagreement on certain things, but there are a lot of places where I learned where there was a lot of common ground, like on how to approach design, on how to say, if you are going to build this, these things are important to us. If you have to do by right zoning here, these are the things that should be incorporated in it. We're going to try to capture all that stuff. We're going to try to reflect on all of that stuff. One of the things this team with UTIL is very good at doing is taking those ideas, visualizing them, bringing them back, saying, did we get this right? Is this something that makes sense? And then if there's stuff we got right, we make sure that's in the plan. If there's stuff we hear a lot of dissent on, we'll keep working on it and seeing where we can go. Now, certainly, MBTA communities and the budget of any consulting project means we can't go on forever. We're going to have to figure out a way to get to a solution here over the course of the winter and spring. But I appreciate you all sticking with us, and I do hope to have all of you back for the next time around. So Tim would like to provide a little next directions here.
So, George. Sorry, I almost took your applause away. So along this whole wall, we just to orient you, because we invite people to come up who to read the Post-its. So these boards with the Post-its are the result of those 2 days of workshops that we had, and we'll be here to explain which boards, which were for which workshop. The newest, hottest drawings of the intersection are the first vertical boards. So you'll see that they look huge on the slide, but they're little drawings. And then some of the earlier intersection stuff that was up last night kind of extends down. So if you want to look at those schemes in some detail too, take a look at those as well. So we'll be around for another half an hour or so. So come talk to us, but mostly take a look. These would be on the website. I guess we could put the photos of the boards on the website as a multi-page PDF. We'll figure this out. So anything else, Jeff?
We have some people with questions. Do you want to just answer them?
No, I think we'd rather do them at the boards just because of time.
Share your questions. What's that?
If I look at George, the next time that the public will be involved is April for
No, there's, I mean, if you read the light yellow, it actually says there's a meeting in February. Steve and I said March because it just might take us that long to get there, but there's actually, I think there's at least 4 more like feedback steps to get to get there. If folks want to go to the boards, they can go to the boards. I'm happy to sit here and answer questions if people have questions for us in general. So we can do both. Yes. What's that? There will be, each of those plans has a spot where we can start to find a combined stop between 70 and 7159. We'll have to refine that by the next meeting. Yeah. Yeah. No, we need to fix that, and that's going to be part of that